was an undergrad, I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And I remember coming home and, having dinner with my family and grandmother and parents and my sisters at the dining room table. And so I made an announcement. I'm a Marxist. And my grandmother said the more education they get, the dumber they get. But anyway, when I'm training in psychiatry and looking for the answer to be an effective psychiatrist with Black people, looking for the answer to racism, and I remember attending a Black Power Committee meeting. And as a matter of fact, I was doing a fellowship in child psychiatry at that point. And I would get a voice. And if you get a voice in here, you need to see a psychiatrist. If you get a voice in here, I think that's God talking to you. And the voice would say, and I would be writing applications at the end of the day, and the voice would say, go to a Black Power Committee meeting. Just quietly. It wasn't frightening. So when ministers say they get a call, and I kind of know what that means. And so this would happen over and over and over again. Again, it was subtle, very subtle, nothing to shake you up or anything, because I didn't go to meetings. And so I finally went to a Black Power Committee meeting. And after the meeting, people were sitting in somebody's apartment eating African food. And a gentleman was on the other side of the room. And I heard this man say, mind you, I'm looking for further answers to racism. And I hear this gentleman over there in the other corner saying racism is a system. And it's like my mind, I'm looking for, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so I started talking to this person. The gentleman's name was Neely Fuller Jr. He wasn't a college professor. He was a guard at the Bureau of Engraving in the District of Columbia, where they print the money. And this man had started writing about racism in the mid-1950s when he was in the Korean War. And he said he was seated on his station was on a radar site up in the mountains in Japan. And he started thinking about racism, thinking about what was going on in this country, in this part of the world. And he said that the language of segregation and desegregation didn't make much sense on that mountaintop. And he started thinking that racism is a system. Now I want to repeat after me. Racism is a system. Now I consider this gentleman one of the most profound thinkers of any color in the 20th century. Remember, we started the 20th century with our great sociologist, historian, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And Dr. Du Bois told us in his book, Souls of Black Folks, in 1903, that the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and darker races of mankind. And then mid-century, Neely Fuller Jr. came along with his book, and I hope that everybody will get his book who doesn't have a copy. His phone number is 202-484-5461. But it is a profound statement, analysis of looking at racism as a total system structure that functions in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. for the ultimate purpose of maintaining the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. So being a psychiatrist, and at that point, that's the mid-1970s, late 1960s. We would sit up in my apartment, and that was when, you're at an age you can sit up and debate at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and get up and go to work. That's not the case today. But I would listen to the discussion of Mr. Fuller. We had another colleague, Dr. Carl Hutchinson. He's deceased, Chicago physician. he was training in orthopedic surgery. And Mr. Fuller had a beautifully hand-printed, might have had 1,800 pages of beautifully handwritten notes, documentation of his ideas that he carried around in a suitcase. Dr. Carl Hutchinson said, I would type this manuscript in between surgical cases. And so he took the handwritten manuscript and typed it, and I spent the next 17 years saying, this has got to be printed, so, got to be published. And so by 1984, it was published. But I started raising the question. Psychiatrists always, old school psychiatrists, I said new school psychiatrists, are just supposed to, oh, you're depressed? Well, let me write a prescription. Oh, you're anxious? Let me write a prescription and goodbye. I'll see you next time for another 15 minutes. I'm old school. I see all my patients for 1 hour. I believe that you have to talk to people and understand and then help them understand so that they can graduate from psychiatrist and go forward because they now understand reality in a different way. So I started saying, well, why? If indeed, and I say racism as a dynamic, racism as white supremacy has been the reality that black people all over this planet have faced for the last 500 years. There's never been a moment, there's never been a minute, there's never been a day, there's never been a week where we have not been confronted with racism, white supremacy as a system. Never a half a minute. So I said, well, why would such a system be developed? And Mr. Fuller used to say to me, Cranston, it's not important why, just learn what the system is. But, the psychiatrist in me, I've got to understand why. See, that's where little children are brilliant. Little 2-year-old people, little 3-year-old people, they start saying, why? Why? And older people get annoyed. But don't ever tell a child. If a child is saying, why, Mommy? Why, Granny? Why? You may not know the answer. Just tell the child, I don't know the answer. But I'll try to find out. And if I don't find out, and you study and learn, you'll find out. But the question why is what turns on the brain computer. The child is asking about cause and effect. And if you can begin to understand cause and effect, you begin to get a handle on dealing with reality. So I raised the question of why this reality of racism. As I said, my grandfather died in 1909. And he's talking about the problem of color. Dr. Du Bois talked about it in 1903. Every black person that has been of significance to black people has tried to grapple with what was happening, what was causing us to be oppressed, and raising issues or raising discussion about it. So I tell people, Mind you, I have a question in the back of my brain computer. Why would they do it? And I was actually in my kitchen cooking pans and dishwater. And the computer came with the answer. And what I started thinking about was things that were said within the system. Number one, the system said that we, as people of color, were minorities. And the other emphasis that was even greater than the factor, the numerical factor, was that we were supposed to be genetically inferior to people who classify themselves as white. Now I say spend as much time in school as you can, spend as much time in the libraries as you can, spend as much time in bookstores as you can. Reading, repeat after me, reading is more important than watching TV. Reading is more important than watching TV. See, everything is in books. Everything is in books. And I say beware of these little small things that you can hold in your hand, where you think you're getting as much information as if you're holding a book. Just beware. So with all of the reading and all of the going to school that I have done, I said, wait a minute. People of color on this planet are the overwhelming majority. Black, brown, red, and yellow people are 9/10 majority on this planet. The other thing, that we are supposed to be genetically inferior. And I said, well, wait a minute. See, in my mind, I'm talking to my, wait a minute. Black people of color, are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration to compare to people who classify themselves as white. And I said, I got it. Just like that, standing in the kitchen, cooking hands in the dishwater. I said, this is the answer. So let me put it on the board. See if you all can see this. Let's say this is the planet Earth. Can you all see? Okay. So 9/10 of the people are black, brown, red, and yellow. 1/10 of the people have white skin. Instead of the people being genetically inferior, the people who can produce the black pigment melanin are genetically dominant. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to take the course in genetics. Just look at our president, Barack Obama. The president's mother is white. His father is black. Because the ability to produce that black pigment is dominant, and the inability is a recessive genetic trait. So black plus white could only produce black. Are you all with me? So I said, now what am I doing? Let's say that this is planet Earth and this is Europe. And this is 1492. And Columbus started European people coming out and moving, little boats coming out of Europe, beginning to circumnavigate the planet. Every place these white gentlemen landed, they found colored people. colored people everywhere.
So we developed a camp called the African Youth Survival Camp, where we took young brothers and sisters out to North Carolina for 3 consecutive years and taught them different things like African manhood, African womanhood, health, hygiene, reading, writing, arithmetic, the ability to survive in today's society, what is the nature of racism, and how did you get in the predicament that you're in, and what are the organization styles you can use to get out of that predicament. Also, I have an organization in New York City called Soul Sisters Incorporated, where we have other African women in the sisterhood to try to develop a situation where we can be more instrumental in developing our community and having a relationship with our community. One of the most important things that I think I have to express at any college campus that I go to is the need for college students and the college university to have a relationship with community people. Usually there is a strong desire among collegiate people to have a relationship with community people, but that relationship in a practical sense does not exist. That relationship in a practical sense is not happening. Usually that doesn't happen is because in an educational system what you get is your mind arranged in a particular way based on a reaction to a particular culture. So when you return to your community, usually you are divorced from the ways, the mannerisms, the style of living, the mode of expression of the people that live here. And so one of the things that I would like to express is the need for us as African students in particular to have a stronger relationship with our community, and in doing so, we should not become strangers in the community, but we should be able to embrace the community and develop them in some way, actually develop ourselves from learning from them. The main message that I spread wherever I go in the country is that we as a people are at war. When I say we are at war, what I mean is a state of war exists anytime anybody tries to take from you that which is rightfully yours. It could be your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, your education, your ability to move along freely in a society from point A to point B. A state of war exists anytime anybody or any system organizes against you to take your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, your proper education, your ability to move from point A to point B. So we as an African people are at war. Whether or not we choose to acknowledge it is one thing or another. But as you know, if you ignore the fact that you're in a state of war, the end result usually is that you will be smashed by the fact that it exists and you have taken no actions to organize yourself. I think it's important that we also understand some basic definitions so that we understand who we're talking about, even when we say we. When I use the term we, I'm talking about African people. When I say African people, I mean those people who come from the continent of Africa who were dropped off in various places around the world. So if you're from Grenada, if you're from Panama, if you're from Guyana, if you're from Jamaica, if you're from certain parts of Latin America, these are all black people dropped off in different places in the world. That's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about African people. Why do I stress the importance of Africa? Africa is not just a power base and a land base, it's a way of life. And I think it's important for us as a people to recognize that. First of all, I think the reason why we reject Africa is because of the way that we have been portrayed in the United States media. Usually when you see pictures of Africa or commercials about Africa, what you see is a black baby with a big head and a bloated stomach. You'll see flies buzzing all over the place. Then you'll see some white woman who will come out and say, "Excuse me, I'm Sally Struthers." This is Abdullah. Abdullah doesn't have any food. His people have forgotten how to plant seeds, and he doesn't have a father. And you'll be surprised what 50 cents can do for Abdullah. So if you can just put it in an envelope and send it to us, we will be able to take care of his family and his entire community. Now, the normal African reaction to that is to reject that particular image, because that's not an image that gives you a feeling of pride. That's not an image that makes you want to claim that particular land, and that's not an image that wants you to makes you want to claim that particular people. If you see a documentary on Africa, usually you will see some naked African people running around. You'll have some white British narrator who's trying to explain what these people are doing, and he usually has absolutely no idea what these people are doing. And you might see some type of a ceremony which involves some type of blood or some type of rituals that are never understood, never explained by the people who claim to narrate and own the footage themselves. And so what has happened is you're reinforced in a negative way about yourself. And so your self-image makes you reject yourself. And when you reject yourself, quite naturally, you destroy yourself, your community, and your own people. Most of the images of young African men today are images of criminals. Usually you can turn on the news at 5 or 6 or 7 p.m. and see several young black men being carted away by the police. Usually their heads are down, their hands are to the back, or their arms are up, leaning up against the wall or something of that nature. So the image of African people is not something that African people ourselves would want to embrace. Usually if you see an African woman on the United States media, it is something that is, she is someone who is portrayed in a negative light. She is someone who is portrayed as some type of a hooker, prostitute, oversexed, somebody who is not intelligent, one-dimensional, flat, so on and so forth. And so as a people, the main thing that we have to struggle against is embracing ourselves and rejecting the cultures of other people in terms of our own definition and understanding who we are. So I stand before you as an African woman, and I say, when I say we, I mean African people.
So what have you got? You've got the nigger woman out front and the man behind and scared. This is a perfect situation for sound sleep and economics. This is what they said, that once they completed this process, we can sleep soundly now. We don't have to stand over them with the whip. You know, we don't have to stand over them anymore and make them do. We set in motion where they're going to do it already. See, the female, and the manifestation, the womb manifestation, she's going to do our work for us now. Before the breaking process, we had to be alertly on guard at all times. Now we can sleep soundly. For out of frozen fear, his woman stands guard for us. See, the black woman stands guard. See, she's the one who keeps this system going, and yet she benefits the least. she benefits the least. She's working, she's toiling, her talents and gifts. Everywhere you see her, she's busy doing for others. But then when it comes time to use those same talents and gifts for her and her offspring, she's too tired. You know, we're tired. And we've been sucked dry of all our gifts, okay? See, and this is what they wanted. Okay, now we can sleep soundly, for out of frozen fear, his woman stands guard for us. He cannot get past her infant slave process. He is a good tool, now ready to be tied to the horse at a tender age. They liken this process to the same process as if you broke a horse, animal breaking, animal breeding. This is, you know, how they figure, like, well, if you can do it with animals, you can do it with the human animal. So this is how they came up with this concept. It says by the time a nigger boy reaches the age of 16, he is soundly broken in and ready for life and efficient work and the reproduction of a unit of good labor force. So their whole agenda was to make sure that this cycle was perpetuated so that they would have a perpetual force of labor that would obediently do everything that they wanted them to do. So this is very interesting. You know, this is very interesting that someone would come up with this information, you know. Continuing through the breaking of uncivilized savage niggers by throwing the nigger female savage into a frozen psychological state of independence, by killing off the protective male image, by creating a submissive dependent mind of the nigger male savage, we have created a 17 cycle that turns in its own axis forever. Unless a phenomenon occurs and reshifts the position of the female savages. We show what we mean by example. Take the case of the 2 economic slave units and examine them closely. So what they're going to tell you now is about the Negro marriage unit. They say we breed 2 nigger males with 2 nigger females. Then we take the nigger males from them and keep them moving and working. Okay, they divide them. Say the one nigger female bear a nigger female and the other bears a nigger male. So she's children now. One a female, one a male. Both nigger females being without the influence of the nigger image, frozen with an independent psychology, will raise their offspring into reverse positions. So what you're seeing is how the imbalance was set in place. And it's perpetuated, and how she perpetuates it. The one with the female offspring will teach her to be like herself. Meaning, hey, they might come kill him any day. We can't, rely on him. They may kill him any day. We really have to be it. We got to really just put our dependency upon ourselves. Don't expect him to be around for you. The one with the female offspring will teach her to be like herself, independent and negotiable. Interesting. We negotiate with her, through her, by her, and negotiate her at will. That's what they say. We negotiate with her, through her, by her, and negotiate her at will. The one with the nigger male offspring, she being frozen with a subconscious fear for his life, will raise him to be mentally dependent and weak, but physically strong. In other words, body over mind. Well, they said you mind over matter. Well, okay, they did the reverse. Body over mind. Whole life is going to be spent being physically strong. The Mike Tyson type. If you look at Mike Tyson, he looks very physically intimidating, doesn't he? But then when you listen to him, then you can see that the mind is the true power. So someone who wants to manipulate him, all they have to do is capture his mind, and he's going to use his physical body to do whatever he wants. So what is the true force? Is it your being physically strong or mentally strong? Mentally strong is the true tool, okay? This is what you really want to work on. Because if you focus too much attention on one and don't apply it to the other, this is what you're going to have, this imbalance. And what the whole objective to living here on the planet is to keep yourself in constant balance. You have to work at that because there's always going to be outside forces that are going to attempt to try to get you out of balance, But, when we assist in our own imbalance, that's really a problem. It said, now in a few years when these two offspring, so they're basically telling you that this is a race who has been raised this way. So now in a few years when these two types of offspring, genetic experiments now become fertile for early reproduction, meaning when they begin to have their own children, we will mate and breed them and continue the cycle. You see what I'm saying? And that is good, sound, and long-range comprehensive planning. So these people are just telling you what they did to us. But now we're the ones that's perpetuating this. You see what I'm saying? So we are definitely going to have to work on building that oneness and bringing the male and female back together in oneness. We can't continue to say, okay, the black female, she's the problem. She's too strong. Black female can't sit up there and say, the black man is the problem. All of them are dogs. Because see, when you tell him that, and he hears that every day, he's going to say, okay, if I'm a dog, well, what gives birth to dogs? Bitches. So that's how we left off being dogs and goddesses, and now we done went to being dogs and bitches. And I mean, it's really sad because we been thinking about it. Bow, wow, wow, yippee, yo, yippee, yay, where's my dog at? I mean, this is sheer uncomfortable. You got the people in the colleges. The Q dogs, I mean, they are really glorified to realize in ancient times to be called a dog. That was like the lowest of the low. Nobody wanted to be called a dog. You just didn't call a person a dog. But now we go around and we glorify ourselves. We label ourselves as dogs and bitches and hoes. So what does that tell you? That obviously this formula works. It works. So you can't read this stuff and hear it and be like, oh, that it didn't work. It works. And it's working now on us. So we have to reshift this. We have to redo this. We have to undo this. It has to start with the female. And I'm not, like I said, trying to undermine the role of the man, because the man's role is important. But you have to realize that the female, the mother, is the first teacher. And, you know, I've heard people say, well, you know, a female, she can't teach no man how to be a man. Let me explain something to you. If the Creator and the universe gave her the responsibility of allowing both to come from her body, she's more than qualified to teach both of them. She wouldn't have been given that responsibility. She's more than qualified. But she's not supposed to be in competition with the man, because she needs him too. Why does she need him? For the very reason I told you in the beginning. To protect, to provide protection, to be the provider. Okay, the man was the helpmate. You have to realize that her main function was the force of life. Not just any life. Not this crazy stuff we are putting on the planet today, these street murders and these Snoopy dogs and look.
It's time, y'all. It's time. It's this thing that I'm holding in my hand, this telephone, this camera, it is quite powerful. Social media is powerful. We can do something with this. If we want to change, we can really, truly make it happen. You know, we sit out here and talk about, oh, we need the next so-and-so and this and that. No, you don't. No, you don't. Start in your own home. Start with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you here eager to join in meaningful dialogue, meaningful conversation about this system of mass incarceration in the United States, a system that has decimated so many of our communities, destroyed so many families, and literally turned back the clock on racial progress in the United States. It seems fitting that this dialogue would be taking place during Black History Month, a time when many Americans pause to consider, if only briefly, our nation's racial history, our racial present, and our collective future. And this year marks the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so it seems more than appropriate to reflect on the meaning of that proclamation, indeed the meaning of emancipation in this era of mass incarceration. And this year also marks the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. 50 years have passed since Dr. King delivered his soaring I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And so in reflecting on where we stand today, 150 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and 50 years after the March on Washington, I'm going to take Martin Luther King Jr.'s advice and tell it straight. As Dr. King put it quite bluntly just months before his death, after the civil rights victories had already been won, after the civil rights bills had already been passed, he said, quote, "I do not see how we will ever solve the turbulent problem of race confronting our nation until there is an honest confrontation with it and a willing search for the truth and a willingness to admit the truth when we discover it." And so in that vein, I'm going to do my best to tell the truth, the whole truth about race in America today. It is a truth that many Americans will deny, just as they were eager to deny the truth about slavery and Jim Crow in their days. But the truth is this: we as a nation have taken a wrong turn in our stride toward freedom. We've betrayed Dr. King's dream. And perhaps nowhere is it more obvious than right here in the city of Chicago. In this great city, President Barack Obama's hometown, a vast new racial undercaste has emerged, though their plight is rarely mentioned on the evening news. Occasionally, we hear about the homicide rate, the violence that has been spinning out of control, not everywhere, but in certain spaces, certain places, certain communities defined largely by race and class. 108 young people were killed in this city last year alone. Hundreds more were killed with scarcely any notice in the media. Just another black man gunned down, another body in the street. When Nadia Pendleton was killed, though, the national media took notice, at least for a moment. She was a 15-year-old girl in the wrong place at the wrong time, according to police. Killing of Nadia Pendleton, an honor student shot dead just days after she performed at President Obama's inauguration, became a symbol of the city's stubbornly high homicide rate and something of a pawn. She became something of a pawn in the national debate over gun control. Now, I am grateful, very grateful, that we are having a national debate about gun control, and for the moment, at least, politicians and the media are paying attention to the deaths of black and brown school children, not just white children killed by deranged mass murderers. But I am deeply disturbed that in this national debate about violence and gun control, there is little honest discussion of why, truly why, some communities are war zones while others are not. For while I support gun control and background checks and all the rest, let me be very clear about that, I think we have got to admit that the reason that some communities are war zones and some are not is not at bottom about the number of guns in those communities. After all, I live in a community where I've come to learn that many of my white neighbors own guns. But my neighborhood is safe. At bottom, what makes a community safe is not the number of guns, but the number of good schools, the number of good jobs, the number of educational opportunities, the numbers of opportunities people have for living a decent life. Those are the numbers that matter most when it comes to violence. And in Chicago, as in so many other cities and communities across America, a choice has been made. It is a deliberate choice. And it is a choice that has been made over and over and over again. Rather than good schools, we have been willing to build high-tech prisons. Rather than create jobs and invest in the communities that need it most, we have embarked on an unprecedented race to incarcerate that has left millions of Americans permanently locked up or locked out. William Julius Wilson has written an excellent book about the changes that occurred in Chicago and other communities around the country entitled When Work Disappears. And in that book, he cites statistics showing that when you control for joblessness, the racial disparities and violent crime disappear. In other words, if you compare white jobless men with black jobless men, rates and violent crime are roughly the same. Men who are jobless, particularly chronically jobless, are more likely to be violent. Now, joblessness does not excuse violence by any means. Most people who are jobless do not resort to violence. But what we know, and what is no secret, is that communities that are plagued by exceedingly high levels of joblessness are likely to be violent. But a shift occurred here in Chicago and in communities across America, urban communities, beginning in the late 50s, early 60s, into the 1970s, where work disappeared. It used to be that factories would be located in urban areas near segregated black communities so those factories could have quick and easy access to cheap black labor. In fact, as late as 1970, more than 70% of all African Americans working in the Chicago area held blue-collar jobs, factory jobs. Almost overnight, those jobs vanished. By 1987, the industrial employment of black men had plummeted to 28%. Due to deindustrialization, globalization, technological advancement, factories closing jobs moving overseas, hundreds of thousands of people, overwhelmingly black men, found themselves suddenly jobless, trapped in racially segregated, jobless communities. Trapped. Economic collapse occurred in urban areas across the country. Now, we could have responded to this crisis, to this literal depression occurring in cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Philadelphia and Detroit and beyond. We could have responded to this crisis, this economic collapse, this literal depression, with an outpouring of care, compassion, and concern. We could have responded with bailout packages, economic stimulus programs. We could have provided job training, particularly to young people coming up in these communities, so they could make the rough transition from an industrial economy to a service-based economy. But no, we chose a different road, a road more familiar when it comes to matters of race. We chose the road of division, punitiveness, and despair. We, as a society, ended the war on poverty and declared the war on drugs. Black men found themselves suddenly disposable, no longer necessary to the functioning of the U.S. economy, precisely at the same moment that a backlash was brewing against the civil rights movement, a backlash that made it convenient for politicians to demonize black men as criminals, as shiftless, as unwilling to work. And so this war on drugs was declared, and black men found that they were no longer needed to work in the fields, no longer needed to labor in factories, and they found themselves scapegoats, pawns in political games, the enemy in a new war. And were rounded up by the millions, locked up, and then permanently locked out. And now, decades later, we stand back and say, what's wrong with these people? Why are they killing each other? Why is there so much violence in these communities that we have abandoned? Communities where good schools cannot be found, but high-tech prisons are a drive away. What's wrong with them? I think the deeper question, the more profound question, is what is wrong with us? Why have we been silent for so long? Well, I've been asked to share with you the thesis of my book, A New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, and I think the title of the book pretty much speaks for itself. I argue that today, in the so-called era of colorblindness, and yes, even in the age of Obama, and even right here in Obama's hometown. Something akin to a caste system is alive and well in America. The mass incarceration of poor people of color in the United States is tantamount to a new caste system, one that shuttles our children from decrepit underfunded schools to these brand new high-tech prisons. It is a system that locks poor people, overwhelmingly poor folks of color, into a permanent second-class status, nearly as effectively as earlier systems of racial and social control once did. In my view, this new system is the moral equivalent of Jim Crow. Now, I'm always very willing, very happy to admit that there was a time that I didn't think this way, that I rejected this kind of talk out of hand. A time when I viewed advocates and activists who were calling the drug war or mass incarceration the new Jim Crow, I thought they were exaggerating, engaging in hyperbole. In fact, there was a time when I thought that people who made those kinds of claims and those kinds of comparisons were actually doing more harm than good to efforts to reform our criminal justice system and achieve greater racial equality in the United States. But I finally woke up. And I woke up after years of working as a civil rights lawyer and advocate, representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality, and investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, and attempting to assist people who had been released from prison as they faced one closed door after another, one legal barrier to their supposed re-entry after another. Trying to assist people re-enter into a society that had never shown much use for them in the first place. That I had a series of experiences that began what I call my awakening. I began to awaken to the reality that our criminal justice system now functions more like a system of racial and social control than a system of crime prevention and control.